So I often start these with asking people like why they do HYROX or why they do any sort of endurance event. But I thought with you, I thought we'd start with like why have you written the books that you've written? Like you've gone deep into like Endure, the book that I know you initially from, and then this latest book. What's been the why for those?
Yeah, I mean, you could start with why are you not doing high rocks? Like, and well, actually, I just put a squat rack in my basement. I do want to get stronger. So, for listeners who don't know me, I come from a running background. So, I have half the high rocks pedigree. Um, and so, in answer to your question, like, why did I write Endure? It springs directly from my experiences as a runner. Um, Competing at a fairly high level as a middle distance runner and a cross country runner for Canada. And I think everyone who competes seriously in any sort of endurance activity has to wrestle with where their limits are and their realization that limits kind of change from day to day. Some days you have a great race, some days you don't, and it's very hard to figure out exactly like I thought I knew what my body's limits were, and then something happened and I was able to push past them. So that got me interested in this idea of the how the mind and body interact to create your limits, and that led to, let's say, 10 years of reporting as a journalist on that topic, which then led to the book Endure. And then after that, I would say that that book was all about how we push our limits. And as you do, as you get to midlife, I started to wonder, well, like, why am I doing this? Why do I push my limits? Why do I keep wanting to figure out what the outer boundaries of my capacities are? And that led me to think about the sort of this idea of exploring and pursuing the unknown. And so I wanted to understand, why I pursue hard endurance challenges, but also why I pursue new opportunities in my career, why I always want to order something different in a restaurant, why I'm drawn to the unknown.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, maybe this is too broad a question to go on to next, but like, why do we want to do hard things like Hyrox and or like the running events that you do? I mean, maybe that's too broad, but I've heard you talk about like the effort paradox or the IKEA paradox as well. Maybe you could touch on those as like a starting point.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the first thing to say is there are a lot of different reasons that people do hard
Yeah.
things, and a lot of them are very good. And it may start out with like for people in running, for example, it often starts with like I can't get off the sofa, I can't walk down the street without getting out of breath. I want to get fitter, and so it's a very simple like proximate. I just want to take care of my body, and that can even lead people to run their first marathon, but it's not enough to explain why people run like their second marathon. Why do people why does it become a lifestyle in a way? Why does it become something that becomes an important part of our lives, which I know it does for a lot of people in running and also in high rocks for sure. And you mentioned the effort paradox, and this is an idea in psychology that I think gets speaks to this point a little bit, which is the idea that sometimes we value things because they're hard, not in spite of the fact that they're hard. So you would think that, well, like there's a sort of general law of biology that's called the law of least effort, which is that all else being equal, we'll take the easy path. If there's an escalator and there's the stairs, we'll take the escalator. But that's really not, and that's true in a lot of contexts, but not when we think about these things like why do people climb mountains? Why do people run marathons? You mentioned the IKEA effect, which I love, which is researchers have actually studied this. You order a piece of furniture from IKEA, you spend all this time scratching your head over these stupid pictographic instructions and looking for the screws, you put it together. You then value that if you were asked to then sell that piece of furniture, you would ask for a higher price than if you had just bought it pre-made off the shelf, the exact same piece of furniture. We value it because we put in effort to achieve it. And this, so it's the IKEA effect. It's why we run marathons. It's probably something to do with why we value having children, which is at once like one of the hardest things we do in life, but also one of the most meaningful things. And so there's a connection between meaning and effort. And it's a deep connection. It's one that's hard to articulate. When you ask people like, what's meaningful in your life and why, it's very hard to say why something is meaningful, but it's possible to recognize that something is meaningful. And putting in effort is meaningful. And probably we've evolved that way to things that are hard bring us good rewards. And so we've evolved to feel a sense of meaning from, digging deep and pushing.
Yeah, yeah. I come from more of a football or soccer background, and like the games that you remember are always the ones that were like a tough 1-0 win, not the 10-0 wins that were very easy against the lower team. It's always like the harder fought battles that the more memorable matches.
Yeah, there's a sweet spot. You don't love losing, right? But you also don't love winning 10-0 because it's like, okay, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
and my daughters are playing soccer, so I'm watching a lot of games these days. They're playing at a reasonably high level, and it's like, even as a parent, it's like, oh, they're up 4-0. This is not that interesting anymore. There's you I think this connects to that, the idea of flow too, where there's to get into that quote unquote flow state, you want a match between your abilities and the challenge. You want it to be, if not a 50-50 toss up, you want there to be uncertainty, which then goes
Mhm.
back to this drive of we want to do things where we don't know what the outcome is. And I mean, I think that's one of the attractive things about endurance challenges is that I can train, I've been training for whatever, 30 years. I still don't know how I'm going to do in any given day in any given race. I still, is today going to be a day where I manage to dig deep and push through the hard parts, or is today a day where I'm going to, not, come up a little short? There's always the unknown, and that's much more interesting. I mean, I guess, sorry to sort of ramble here, but it's like my journalistic thing is I focus on the science of endurance, and there's a stream of endurance science that is like if we measure enough things in the lab, we should be able to predict people's performances perfectly. We're going to strap on all these wearables. We're going to measure VO2 max, running economy, lactate threshold, and we'll know exactly who's going to win each race. And if that science ever succeeded, it would, to me, take away most of the interest in the sport. If you could just put people in the lab and then take their measurements and then you mail it in and say, well, you get the Olympic gold, you get the Olympic silver, you get the Olympic bronze because we've tested your measurements and we know that you would win the race. But there's always upsets. You can never predict what's going to happen. And that's on a personal level too. You never know on any given morning how whether you're going to, exceed your expectations, meet them or fall short of them. And that's the great thing about the sport.
Yeah, yeah. Um, your new book is called The Explorer's Gene. Um, is it like simple question, but is there a gene? Do we have a gene that leads us to want to explore and go to new places and everything like that? Is there a gene within us?
Yeah, so the title is maybe, let's say, deliberately a little bit provocative because people get worked up when you start talking about a friend of mine, David Epstein, wrote a book called The Sports Gene about 10 years ago, and it's a fantastic book for anyone who hasn't read it about this idea of like how do nature and nurture interact in sports. And it's like, no, there isn't a sports gene, at least not one single one that determines sports performance. As for exploring, so there is a gene that gets called the explorer's gene, and that it's fascinating. You can look at it's distributed differently among populations depending on how far they migrated from Africa, 50,000 years ago. That the populations that ended up in the southern tip of South America have very high levels of this explorer's gene. And within any given population, there's some people who have, and it's a gene that's related to dopamine and how whether you get a big shot of dopamine from or sensation from discovering something new or a smaller one. And so these things do affect our behavior. There's some genetics there, but it's I think the deeper point about this genetics, this wiring that wires us to pursue the unknown, is that we all have it. It's just some of us have a slightly bigger helping than others. So it's not that some people are wired to explore, some people aren't. It's that we're all kind of drawn to, you know, pursue the unknown, to find out where our limits are in different contexts. It's not that everyone wants to go parasail to the South Pole or whatever, but everyone is trying to, whether it's intellectually or athletically or whatever the case may be, is drawn to find out new things. But there is some genetics that some people want more of it.
One thing I found interesting in the book was that like our ancestors still explored, relocated, even though they didn't have to. You know, that like there is obviously a survival element to some exploring and relocation, but like in instances where they didn't have to for their survival, they still did it.
Yeah, it's like, why did our ancestors, move from Africa to Europe? Well, maybe it was because there was some bad weather in Africa or whatever, or there, not enough animals. How did they end up on Easter Island? Nobody ends up on Easter Island because it was too crowded in Tahiti or whatever like that. Like you have to, and people have studied this very carefully. And it's like, could you end up on Easter Island or various other islands in the Pacific by accident? It's like, no, you pretty much have to set out with the goal of exploring the unknown, of sailing across the horizon without knowing what's going to be there. And that's something that's it's a topic of argument. It's something it seems to be unique to humans that of really just and that's why humans spread so fast around the globe once they had this genetic mutation that predisposed them to explore.
Yeah, interesting. Um, in the book, I think you have like five. I want to say rules, but rules is probably the wrong word. Like principles that I thought maybe we could like base like the start of this discussion around. And one of which is explore then exploit. Can you sort of talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. So when I started working on this book, I think I imagined that the subtitle was going to end up being something like "The Case for Why We Should All Explore More" or something like that. And what I realized that's not quite right. The scientists in this area talk about the choice between exploiting and exploring. So exploring is trying something new. Well, exploiting is going with the path you're already on, doing what you already know because to get results that you can predict. Exploring is like, no, even though I already know this path, I'm going to try something completely different. Like it could be, a runner is like, I'm going to keep running. I'm really good at running 5Ks. I'm going to run nothing but 5Ks. That's exploiting your experience. Exploring is like, you know what? I'm pretty strong too, or I need to get stronger. I'm going to try a HYROX race, right? Like, so but I don't know how that's going to go. I don't know whether it's going to, I'm going to get crushed or, um, so, and the point is, if you explore all the time, that's not particularly productive any more than exploiting. If you exploit all the time, you never discover anything new. If you explore all the time, you can think of this in the context of music. Like, do we tend to listen to a lot of different music when we're younger, and as we get older, we tend to be like, all right, I don't need to find any more music. I have all the music I need. I'm just going to keep listening to the best tracks. Now, if you say that's not good, you should keep exploring. You should keep discovering new things. That's great. It's good to keep discovering new music. But if you were to never listen to the same album twice, that as soon as you discover something new, you're like, okay, now I've heard that. Now I need to find something new. Then what's the point of exploring? You discover new things, you never get a chance to enjoy them. So you need to explore and exploit. And it turns out that when you look at what's the most productive way of making progress, it's having a period of exploration followed by a period of exploitation. It's not all grind and it's not all like wandering around. And in the athletic context, one way to think about that is how do you end up with top level athletes? If you look at their trajectories, their career trajectories from when they were kids, one pattern that recurs is that they tend to have participated in a lot more different sports when they were younger. They didn't just be at the age of 6 decide I'm going to be a badminton player and I'm going to do nothing but badminton for the rest of my life. And you could say, oh, maybe that means that they learn better hand-eye coordination or something like that. But a lot of that is if you try different sports, you find the one that you're best at, that your body and mind is best at. And so I think that's a really good argument for trying different activities throughout life is that you never know until you try. And so it's just like as a runner, if you only run 5Ks, you may not realize that, oh, it turns out, you were really good at marathons. Or I have a friend who actually started running marathons in his early 20s, and he ran marathons for like 15 years. And then in his late 30s, he was training with my group, which is more track based. And he was like, oh, maybe I should try some of these shorter races. And it turned out he was exceptionally good at the 800 meters, and it's very rare to go from running, 2-hour races to 2-minute races. But it turned out he had just never realized that his physiology was ideally suited for middle distance. He didn't do enough exploring of that when he was younger. So anyway, yeah, explore then exploit is kind of a general pattern to keep in mind.
It's an interesting point where you were just saying, like, I've noticed, like, I speak to a lot of the elite athletes from HYROX on here, and their backgrounds are very broad, like lots of different sports. It's not like they just happen to be doing something like HYROX for like since they were a kid, or even just running. There's a wide range of sports, and then they sort of slowly narrow in on one that they're specializing.
And I think that HYROX in particular, in the broader context of sort of this idea of hybrid athletes, I think that especially tends to reward people who aren't super specialized in one
Hmm.
area of physiology. But the truth is, like, if the a lot of sports, I mean, running is maybe one of the most narrowly specialized sports there is. But if you talk about football, it's like you need to have top sprint speed to be able to chase down a ball. You need to have endurance to play for 90 minutes. You need to have strength. You need to have like explosive power to be able to jump. Like you need to have hand-eye coordination. And it's useful to develop these skills in a lot of different contexts and not to be narrow too early. So like my as I said, my kids are playing what we call soccer, and I struggle with the push to specialize early. The
Hmm.
club organizations are like, yeah, you got to be playing soccer year round. You got to do this extra training. It's like I really think that they're better off playing hockey in the winter and doing some other things, both because it's fun, but also because it gives you an opportunity to develop different skills, to explore different abilities, to figure out where your strengths are and stuff. So yeah, it's but I love the rise of sports and activities that explicitly reward having different kinds of abilities rather than specialization.
Yeah, yeah. This maybe leads us on to the next topic of like play more and thinking about play and creativity and like the creativity crisis. Um, can you talk about that some more?
Yeah, for sure. I so maybe a place to start there is there's this effect called the Flynn effect, which is that if you look at standardized IQ scores over the last 100 years or so, they've been gradually getting better. It's like we seem to be getting smarter, and that's a well-known effect. People have and there's various reasons people debate for it. What's less known is that there are also standardized tests of creativity called the Torrance tests. And those scores have been going down since the 90s. They keep having to renormalize the scores because kids are getting less and less creative. And it's gotten even steeper since about 2012. So people are less creative. And we can go down lots of rabbit holes as to why that is. And I think screen time is in the modern world is definitely a big factor. But the decline started back in the 90s, corresponding with a decline in free play and outdoor play. And I think anyone who's looked at kids or watched kids or been a kid sees the differences. I happen to live in the same neighborhood that I grew up in, and my kids go to the same school I went to, so I can really directly compare. It's like when I was a kid, everybody walked to school, and then after school, everyone hung out in the park and played games and blah blah blah. And now everyone is driving off to their soccer practice or whatever, and it's just like it's a very different vibe. So I think there's a connection between the decline of play and the decline of creativity. And I think one of the reasons for that is that going back to this idea I was talking about before, that we're drawn to uncertainty, and the reason we're drawn to the unknown is to learn about it, to learn about the world. And our brains are wired to pursue the paths that are most likely to teach us new and interesting things about the world. And so this idea of play isn't something you force someone to do, right? Like play is you're out there making the rules of your own game and doing what seems fun to you. It's intrinsically motivating. And if you're doing that, if you're following that urge, then you're more likely to be pursuing paths that are interesting and are going to teach you about the world. The, it's not just about kids. I think it's about adults too, that it's again, it's hard to force yourself to play, but I think we could do a better job of trying to give ourselves the space and the time and the permission to explore things that seem fun. And I know, like running for me at its best is a game. It's not an obligation. Of course I do it because I like to be fit and things like that. But I go and I take part in cross country races with my training partners as a team event. We're interested in whether we can beat the other masters cross country teams. I mean, that has no like existential meaning or societal benefit. It's play. And I think I, it, I just said it has no existential meaning, but this play brings meaning to my life, and I think it's that kind of uh, approach to letting yourself do things that are fun that can actually be really not just rewarding, but lead you into to new ideas and to be able to be creative.
I guess there's a balance in that. Even with the example you just gave, like in the cross country, like, and you see it in HYROX, like people take their training very, very seriously, and it's almost like the be all and end all. And I guess you almost have to be careful for it to become too serious and like bring that element of play and fun to it as well, right?
Yeah, it's a tightrope, right? Like
Mm,
the fun of an activity like HYROX or other forms of endurance sports. I mean, for it to be fun, you have to prepare seriously, right? Like
mm,
it's not fun to run a marathon if you just decide that morning to run the marathon. The fun depends on really hard work, and not just hard work, but smart work. You have to think carefully about how you're training, and you have to take it seriously. But there's a point at which it becomes a job, and anyone who gets really serious in an endurance sport is familiar with this line of like, wow, when did this become something that was fun and become this obligation that I wake up? So for me, one of the I guess the markers of that dividing line is like wearable tech and data and this sort of thing. I I've always been someone who loves analyzing data, who loves collecting data and seeing trends and stuff. But I grew up and started training in the 90s when it was really hard to collect data and you had to really work to get it. Now we can get so much data on ourselves. I've eventually recognized that for me personally, because of my personality, that's one of the things that tips it into becoming job rather than game. That I'm like, oh, here's my mileage, here's my average pace for the last week. Oh no, compared to last week, it's not as good. I have to go out and run more. And then I catch myself like, why? Why? Who cares? No one's checking my training log. So I don't I don't run with a GPS watch, for example. And it's not that I don't think GPS watches are useful. It's just that for me, I want to make sure that this remains a fun game, like a source of fun and play rather than like, oh, I'm working a second job. It's as a runner.
yeah. The other sort of thing I noticed from the example you gave, like you said about your cross country like team, uh, and I spoke to Steve Magnus recently actually, and we sort of talked about the importance of training partners and training a group, and I guess that helps to add an element of fun and play to it. If you're if you're training for endurance on your own for 20 hours a week, it's probably much less fun than if you're in a group as well.
I think that's huge for me. And I think, look, people are different. I interviewed a guy once who studied like group exercise, and he said his take was that about two-thirds of people are wired to love exercising with other people, and about one-third are like, no, I'm good. I'm happy on my own. So look, everyone's wired differently, but for me, um, I think without a team, I would still be running. But in terms of doing the hard workouts, really getting in there and pushing my limits, it's almost essential for me. Not maybe not essential, but it's infinitely more enjoyable to be there with a group of friends, especially what I really like is when it's over a long period of time and you get a chance to know people and you're pursuing a common goal. So what I've really loved the last few years is that my training group has run the National Masters Cross Country Championships. And so that gives us something that we're pursuing together and that we have a shared endeavor. So it gets us out of bed on Saturday mornings for a hard workout. And then at the end, we may go and stay in a hotel somewhere the night before the race. And it's just like, it's like we're 19 again. And it's like, yeah, I'm 49. Why can't I still have fun and play games and go on a road trip to run a race? And yeah, so that social aspect I think is crucial. I don't run with people every day. I would say I run with a friend maybe once a week, and I meet a group maybe once or twice a week, and then I do the rest of my runs on my own. So then that's just, logistics of having a job and a family and training when I can. But
Yeah,
getting those couple of times a week at least of being with other people, I think is super important.
yeah. Um, Active versus passive exploration. You touch on in the book. Can you explain that some more?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is a kind of subtle point, but I think maybe one way to think about it is what's the difference between being like Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbing Everest for the first time versus paying someone to $100,000 to guide you to the top of Everest and take care of cook all the meals and make all the logistical arrangements and just check the weather and do all the things that make Everest still risky versus watching a really cool documentary about Mount Everest on TV. When I think about exploring, and if you look at the literature, the science on exploring, it's like, oh, it's this drive to find out about the world. That's why we do it. Well, you can find out the same stuff. All three of those things teach you the same things about the world. And you could argue that the National Geographic documentary or the David Attenborough documentary or whatever on Everest is actually going to teach you a lot more about Everest than just walking to the top. But there's still, to me, something very different between doing it yourself and it's a sliding scale, or like being on a package tour somewhere where you're seeing the same things, but you're able to just kind of sit back and kind of watch the world go by, as opposed to having to make decisions and take risks and weigh uncertainties and formulate a plan, versus just having it spoon fed to you, versus being on TikTok or whatever, and the algorithm is feeding you some short videos about Everest, and just you're getting maybe some of the same information. So I guess I my take is that there's a big difference between doing something actively and doing some and being a passive spectator, being the sort of protagonist in your own adventure versus just being the spectator. There's some neuroscience research that shows that suggests that our brains it's different parts of the brain if we're being shown something versus if we're going out and trying to figure something out. And so that's one aspect of it. It's not just about like getting off the couch and climbing Everest. It's more about having the autonomy and having to make decisions and taking risks. It's like the difference between hopping in an Uber to get across town when you're visiting a new city versus going out and wandering through the streets and looking at a map, figuring out how you need to get there, and then trying to get there. By the time you get to the destination, if you've hopped in the Uber, you know nothing about the city. All you know is what the car seat looks like, and that you know how to get home by calling an Uber. If you walk through the city, you've seen the city. You know some of the streets. You have a sense of where things are relative to each other. You've learned a lot more about the world, and to me, that's a much more rewarding way of doing it. That doesn't mean that I want to climb Everest without a guide. That's not. It's in different contexts, different levels of activeness and passiveness might make sense. But it just means when possible, I like to make my own decisions and follow my own interests rather than say having an algorithm tell me what I should watch next or think about next or read next.
Yeah. I was thinking about it in the context of HYROX, and like I guess I mean you can put yourself in the arena. You can go to a HYROX and it's a whole experience, and you can compete against other people. But you know what the workout is, so in theory, like you could just do it in the gym in your own time, and just like not have that whole experience and do it on your own terms. But it is two very different experiences at the end of the day, and you learn a
Yeah,
lot more about yourself from going to the event.
yeah, and it's certainly the same with like these big marathons, and it's like you can run 26.2 miles anytime you want, but people pay large sums of money to be part of that experience. And part of that is what we're talking about earlier, that, being with other people, there's the social
Mm-hmm.
aspect, but there's also just like you said, being in the arena, I think. And it's like, I think this is a broader societal trend of like, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, every town had a town band and a town football team and a town, entertainment was local. Now, because of the way telecommunications have changed, everyone in the world can watch the five best musicians and the five best athletes and read the five best books. It's like, okay, so the quality of what you're reading or watching is probably better, but the experience I'm not sure is always better. And so I play pickup basketball on Friday nights with some other old guys around here. And it's like, we could be at home watching the NBA, or we could be at the gym putting up bricks and like moving at 2 miles an hour as we run up and down the court. Like sometimes one of the guys videos some of our things. And every time we watch it, we're like, Why are you putting it in slow motion? Surely that's not how slow we're moving. Like the quality of the basketball is not high, but being the guy who's taking the shot and maybe missing it is so much better than watching somebody else take the shot. Even though I also love watching great music and sports, but that shouldn't be the whole the whole scope of your involvement with let's say sports. You should be doing something.
Yeah, yeah. I like you've been an athlete for much of your life, and I think you're like quite an explorer as well. Like you do a lot of trails and things like that. But has writing this book and all this research, like, and there's a huge amount that's gone into this book. Has it changed your life in any way? Have you thought about things differently in any aspects?
For sure. I mean, it goes both ways. Did writing the book change my life, or did thinking about my life cause me to write the book? Because in some ways, this book came from me thinking about like what should the role, like I was thinking career wise, what do I want to do? Do I want to just keep doing the same thing or try something different? And that's part of what led me to end up writing this book. I think one of the big insights for me, or one of the big things, I get maybe there's two things. One that I alluded to before, which was that I have this drive to explore, to find new things. And so I wrote a book about exploring, but what I got out of it is that more exploring isn't always the right answer. And so I'm maybe a little more conscious of trying to appreciate, to exploit the things that I discover, to enjoy having found something new. If I try a new dish in the restaurant, it's okay to then order that same thing next time because I know I'm going to like it. I might as well take advantage of what I've discovered, or what I've learned. And I guess, uh, yeah, I mean, I think that's the big thing. Sorry, I had another thought on the tip of my tongue and I'm blanking on it right now. But I, I guess what it was, yeah, what I was going to say was, as a traveler, I've been really focused on like going to the wildest places I can find, going to like deep into the backcountry, in places around the world to get this sensation that I'm discovering something that, even though I know I'm not, like I'm not an actual explorer, but to get this the illusion that I'm in a place where nobody else goes. And I think one of the things that has come out of the of this process of writing the book is I've realized that the sensation, the satisfaction of exploration doesn't require that I am on a mountain in a jungle somewhere far away, that I don't have to, create these extreme circumstances. That what it requires is looking around and seeing that there are places or ways of exploring all around me. So maybe a best example is I live in Toronto. It's a city of 4 million, but I live a block from a river. The river has a beautiful parkland all along the river, so there's no houses there. So one of the things I did last year was I bought a kayak, and I can carry the kayak a block down the river, pop it in the river, and when I'm on the river, I can't see any buildings. It feels like I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm not discovering anything, but it's been the idea of looking for places and ways of feeling that, and like I discover things that I have not seen before on this river. Like I know this river very well, but when you're on the river, it looks different. I'm like, oh, I didn't know there was a marsh over here. And I go into the marsh. Oh, there's a deer over there in the city of Toronto, and there's some turtles and a great blue heron. And so it's about not necessarily going to the ends of the earth, but looking for opportunities to try different things and find the sensation of new things around me.
Mm-hmm. Right. Uh, you mentioned like the explore and exploit and like the restaurant example, but I was actually thinking about it in the context of HYROX and training for HYROX and the importance of consistency as well in endurance. And that's something that Steve Magnus actually touched on as well. But I guess you do have to be careful to not to try and explore too much when you're training. You want to keep like your training consistent and like not try like one style of training and then something else after like a month because you haven't progressed hugely. I feel that's maybe something that people in HYROX especially need to be wary of because there are so many elements to it, so many different ways to train for it. It's almost tempting to want to mix things up after a month, whereas maybe that's not the best option.
Yeah, and so I see this again. Like I write a lot about the science of endurance, so I'm always writing about the latest, greatest, newest thing. Like in running, it's Norwegian double thresholds because Jakob Ingebrigtsen does them, or it's we need to take twice as many carbohydrates as we used to or we need to do saunas or ice baths or what, or take ketones. There's always something new, and mea culpa. It's like I write about them, so I'm part of fueling the interest in them. But I think as you said, there's definitely a danger in just being like, I'm going to do whatever the coolest, hottest thing that we were talking about last week is, because then you're never giving yourself a chance to actually exploit the techniques you're using. And so there's two issues here. One is that like whatever you're doing, you need to give it a chance to work. But the other is that the basics are actually pretty basic, and there's been plenty of exploration over the last 100 years of how to train for endurance events. So we know some pretty big principles about, don't go hard all the time. Like you need a large volume of easier training. And the things like should you be taking whatever ketones or whatever, all of this is like minor. So you can play around with it if you want, but don't confuse that for doing the work. Doing the work is something steady. Now, I will say, from the outside in, I will say my understanding of like concurrent training or hybrid training, where you're trying to, rather than maximizing endurance or maximizing power and force and strength, but optimizing the balance between them. I actually think that there's a lot less. There isn't like the 100 years of experience to figure out the right way. So I would shift my balance of like, how much am I willing to try new things in a sport like HYROX? I'd be a little more open to experimentation, because I don't think the optimal solutions are necessarily as obvious as they are in a sport like long distance running, where it's like, yeah, we've tried pretty much every combination of like all intervals, all long runs, all this, all that. So for sure, and that kind of makes it fun in that it's not a closed book yet.
Yeah.
There's still stuff to learn, but the basic principle remains the same. It's like if you change your training plan every month, then you have no idea what's working and what's not, because you haven't given it a chance to take effect.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. It feels like an exciting time in the sport, just because of how it's growing, but because we're all learning what the best way is, and there's not this one set plan that everyone's following yet. It's very, very different approaches. It's an interesting time, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a famous race in running, the 1964 Olympic 5,000 meter final, and the top four finishers, they were, very, very close. And it just happens that they're all kind of the representatives of dramatically different training styles. Like one guy, the guy who won actually, uh, Bob Schull, he trained with nothing but intervals, like every day, all day, short intervals. And then one of the other guys, Van Aken, I think he was fourth. He did like nothing that was hard. He would only jog. It was all jogging. And there was another guy who was Ron Clark, was kind of all threshold, like medium tempo running. And then Bill Dellinger, the bronze medalist, I think it was like a more modern, what we would think of as a modern version of training, a mix of like hard and easy and long and slow. And so it's like all four of those guys were doing radically different things. That's maybe the era where HYROX is in now, where you can get top athletes who are all doing completely different things, and you have these sort of battles of the training philosophies.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I talk with a lot of athletes on here about is the mindset and where their mind goes in the race. And I know in your book, like Enduro, you talked about like the power of the mind, if you like. It's not just pure physiology. And I think you touch on as well that like top endurance athletes, they don't necessarily feel less pain, like they respond to it differently. Um, do you have any? I mean, I guess the question is like, do you have any tips for the people listening on like how to think about that area where their mind maybe should go during the race, and things that could help their performance?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying I apologize. I'm better at figuring out what the problems are than figuring out what the answers are. But so I've never really written a training manual, because I never feel confident in those suggestions. But yeah, a couple of things that I think are maybe worth bearing in mind. The sort of rule number zero is understand that your mind does play a role. Like, and I think I would say one of the big mistakes I made as a young guy in the 90s competing was that I thought it was all physiological. I didn't worry about the mind. And I think that bit me in some ways that there were times when I underperformed because I just wasn't sort of taking seriously the fact that I needed to be in the right headspace to race well. And that I sort of, to me, sports psychology seemed a little bit like voodoo science. And I didn't believe it was worth really listening to the things that I heard from sports psychologists. So I think that was a mistake because it's pretty clear now. There's quite a bit of research that shows that the the inner monologue, what's the voice that's going on in your head, it does have an effect on what your body is able to do. And ultimately it's kind of serving as a filter. Your brain is making decisions on can we keep going? Can we keep pushing? It's making decisions based on the feedback from your body, but it's also making decisions based on the feedback that you're giving it by if you're saying this feels really hard, I'm going to fail, then the brain is like, well, if we're going to fail, I guess we might as well slow down. So so like step one is start to pay attention to what you say to yourself in the middle of a race. Like listen in and if you're like most people, you'll find that you say a lot of very negative things to yourself, that there's a lot of like uh there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of pessimism, and you want to try and get that under control. You want to recognize when you're having these sorts of negative thoughts and kind of say, no, that's not right. This is, and you want to have something. This is an idea that's in sports psychology called motivational self talk. You want to have some things ready that you've practiced saying to yourself. That things like, okay, it's not. You don't want to say like, this isn't hard. It's easy. I'm no problem. I'm going to win because that's not true. It's not easy. And so it's not going to work if you're just telling yourself, lies. But you can say to yourself, it's hard, but this is what I expected. Everyone else is feeling it just as much as I am. This is what I've trained for. I chose to be here and this is what I wanted. And I know I'm ready for this. So that's taking control of self-talk as I think probably the most powerful thing. I guess the one other thing I would add is, you mentioned dealing with discomfort. One of the hallmarks of athletes, like you said, it's not that they don't feel pain, it's that they're able to sort of deal with it differently. And one of the ways they do that is that they view pain as information. So you want to try and get rid of the emotional part of it, where it's like, I feel pain. That means I'm going to blow up. I've failed in this race. This sucks. Or I'm going to hurt myself. As you train, you get, the training exposes you to discomfort over and over again, and you can get better and better at noticing those sensations, not denying them, noticing that what you're feeling and using it as information. That's like, okay, this feels worse than it normally does. This probably means I'm pushing harder than I normally do, which suggests that I might not be able to hold it. So I need to dial back my intensity. Or it feels bad, but it feels bad in the way that it always feels bad. So I know that I'm going to be able to keep going, even though it feels bad. Like I often say, like, when people are asking advice about how to run a 5K, I'm like, if you get to halfway and you feel like you're going to be able to make it, you're not going hard enough. You should be convinced that you have screwed up. Halfway through the 5K, you should be like, I can't believe I did this. There's no way I can maintain it. If you did that, that's where you need to be. And so with experience, you start to be able to use those feelings as information rather than as a cause to sound the alarm.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I wasn't really a runner before I got into HYROX, and then like I did a 5K a few years ago, and I remember like it was after like even a K maybe. I was like, I've gone out too hot here, and I remember saying that to my coach. He was like, yeah, you got it right. You got it right. Like,
that's right. Now,
yeah.
it is possible to actually go out too hard, and
Yeah.
most people will experience that. But so you then have to learn the subtle flavor differences between it feels like I've gone out way too hard, which is just right, or I feels like I've gone out way too hard, and I have, and hell is going to ensue.
Yeah. Do you is that mindset, that sort of interpretation of pain, is that one of the things that you think does separate elite athletes from everyone else? Like, is that one of the things? And if so, like, are there others as well that spring to mind that do separate elite athletes from others?
Yeah, I mean, so the answer is yes. I think it does separate things from others. There's also a lot of like physiology that separates elites from everyone else, and so the trap you don't want to fall into is like the mind matters going to it's all in the head. It's all in your head. You can just try harder and then you can win the Tour de France or whatever. No, that's not how it works. And like the physiology matters for sure. But there's some really like uh really cool research on things like pain tolerance where there was one study I remember, I think it was ultra runners doing it's a ice plunge challenge. Basically, you put your hand in ice water and it starts to hurt after a while, and you're supposed to keep it in as long as you can until the pain gets intolerable. And I can't remember what the maximum time was, maybe 2 minutes before they had to pull it out for safety reasons. But it's like they did it with normal people, and the normal people averaged, I don't know, like a minute or something like that. And maybe like 1%, 10% of them might have made it to the 2 minutes. The ultra runners, they all made it to 2 minutes. And by 2 minutes, they were like, yeah, this is 6 out of 10. We're like, so when you're training for an ultra run, it's not like you train to put your hands in ice water. So it's not a direct training effect. It's just that mentally they've learned to, uh, you know, take these signals and tell the difference between like a warning light when a warning light goes on and versus when your engine is actually about to blow up. And so, um, I mean, and there's other studies too that look at like pain tolerance or ability to handle discomfort, and it's like it's graded. Like the elites are better than the good recreational athletes, who are in turn better than the average person on the street, and it goes up and down even with training cycle. That it's not that you learn it once and then you never have to worry about pain. This is something that athletes, part of the training process is they're learning over and over again. Like it's, when you come back after an off-season break or something like that, and it's like, the first really hard workout, and you're like, oh man, I forgot. That's what it feels. Why do I do this again? Like it is that hard. And so we need to keep learning this lesson over and over again. So, and there are other like, I think that's the big one. So I mean, the question then is like, why or how do they do it? And it's harder to answer that question, but there's evidence for some of these things like, top athletes have a sort of more mindful approach, where mindfulness in the context of non-judgmental self-awareness. In other words, they're attuned to what's going on in their bodies, but they're not overreacting to it. They're non-judgmental about it. I'm aware of this pain, but I'm not screaming about it. And so whether doing mindfulness training helps that's one idea that has a little bit of evidence, or just getting out and training over a long period of time and sort of being conscious of like, what am I thinking? How am I responding to the stimuli I'm feeling from my body? All of that, I think, sort of adds up to learning to handle this discomfort better.
Is there anything in all your research, either in writing Endure, in the Explorer's Gene, as a journalist, like, has there been anything that's like really surprised you, or that's been counterintuitive that you've learned? Anything that springs to mind there?
I think all these years later, I think probably the most surprising research to me was something when I dug into Endure. One of the topics I looked at was like, I was interested in like oxygen. Like, is that, when you go running, how much of the feeling of slowing down is because you're running out, you can't get oxygen to your muscles. So like, how long can we go without oxygen? So I was like, oh, I should look up the free diving literature and the breath holding literature. And the free divers are just insane. Like, so you look at, they're diving, 100 meters below the surface and then coming back up on a single breath. And it's very hard for me to contextualize how far 100 meters is. It just feels like a long way, especially because, if I go out too fast in a 5K and can't sustain my pace, the penalty is I run a slower time than I wanted to. If I go a little too far in a free dive and then can't make it back to the surface, the penalty is I black out and maybe die. So like, that sport seems crazy to me. But if you take away the freediving element, because and just say, well, how long can people hold their breaths? And then the record was, I think when last time I looked, it was like 11 minutes and 55 seconds or something like that. And that was just like, there's a trick there, right? That's like they're inhaling pure oxygen first. It's like, no, if they inhale pure oxygen, the record's like 24 minutes. This is just, all right, we're going to do a breath hold. you stick your face in water because that triggers a diving reflex, and also because then you can't cheat because your face is underwater. And people can do it for 11 minutes. And to me, that was like a super surprise that rewired my expectations of like, wow. So when I'm, after, just over a minute, I'm like, oh, these guys are not even getting started.
Yeah, it's crazy. Have you seen the free diving Netflix documentary? I think it's
No, I
the
haven't.
deepest breath. It's amazing, amazing. Yeah,
I,
like
I,
pretty scary because
I was
like
gonna say, like, I'd be worried that it's gonna give me nightmares. I'll be waking up in the night. They're like, no, no, I'm still 20 meters below the surface.
yeah,
No.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
I'll have to
yeah,
check that out.
yeah, yeah. It's amazing. Um, uh, this has been fantastic. Thank you. There's a few questions that we typically finish up on. Uh, Not necessarily to do with your books, but what's been your best ever sporting experience?
Best ever, like highest accomplishment or most fun?
Just most fun. What's
Yeah,
like best memory?
yeah. I would have to say it was a high school cross country race when I was 15 years old. Uh, the first time that I won a big race, and there's a couple things I remember about it. One is like winning is nice, but also it's in at high school meets like you never get a more enthusiastic crowd like all the team, the other students there and parents, everyone. And I just remember I have a memory of coming down the straightaway in a big sprint with a rival, and it was like a tunnel. All the people leaning over the ropes, screaming. And I remember someone I knew, or the parent of another runner, leaning out, and his face almost like knocking me over. And he was an Eastern European guy had been an elite runner in his day, and he just leaned out and goes, "Who wants it?" And my first reaction was like, "Screw you, buddy." I'm like, I'm dying here. But then I was like, "I want it," and I was able to outkick the other runner, and I think that's maybe the moment I got it. That I got addicted and became a runner for life rather than just a runner. And again, it was a cross country race, part of a team, all the things that we've talked about that made it so meaningful and so much fun.
Love it, love it. How about your your toughest sporting experience?
All right. Settle in and I'll tell you a 4 hour story of my toughest. Yeah. No, there's a race I ran in university where I won't get into the details, but it was, I had a chance of winning the national championships, but there was a one rival who had better speed than me. He was an Olympic 400-meter runner, and a couple of rivals who had good endurance. So I had to thread the needle between deciding when to start my sprint. And leaving aside the details, I gave it my all. I was leading for the last 400 meters in the race. About 60 meters to go, the Olympic 400-meter runner started moving up on my shoulder, and I was like, "And not today. I am going to hold you off." So I dug deeper than I have ever dug. But he still started to inch ahead, inch ahead. And as we got to the line with about 10 meters to go, I basically just like my body stopped working. And two guys flashed by me at the photo finish. So they actually presented me with the bronze medal. But then the next morning on photo review, they realized that no, I had actually come fourth. So I had to give the medal back in a sort of shameful reverse medal
Ouch.
ceremony. But I crossed the line after that race, and I sort of staggered about 20 meters, collapsed and started vomiting. And I was vomiting nonstop, just dry heaving because there was nothing left in my stomach for 45 minutes. And then I didn't sleep. I had still had another race the next day, but I didn't sleep a wink that night because I was so like, I had been vomiting for so long. So that was a really disappointing race. I thought I could win the race, or at worst I would get a medal, and I came fourth. But I look back at that moment as like one of my proudest moments in a way that is like, as disappointing as it was, there is no other moment in my life in any domain where I can say to the same degree, man, I gave it everything I had. I gave it, I know that I left nothing on the table. And that's like, it's a proud feeling, even though it's still, even as I tell this story, I'm like, oh man, couldn't I have hung on for the bronze?
No, I get that. I mean, it's sort of come up a few times on this pod. Like the toughest experiences have actually benefited the athlete in the future because like nothing is ever that hard again, and you sort of know how hard you can push yourself. You know where you can get to, and it kind of stays with you, I think.
and I think it's maybe an illustration of this idea we talked about right at the beginning about hard things feeling meaningful.
Hmm.
There's a reason that I bring up like the hardest thing I ever did because it sticks with me, and it's like, yeah, that's at the far end of like I've never gotten back to that spot, and I'm kind of glad I've never gone back to that spot. But it's exact, but striving to get somewhere near there is what still makes every race I run meaningful in some way.
Yeah. Um, uh, Another question we typically ask is, what's the best piece of advice someone's given you while you've been training for HYROX or that you've discovered? And I appreciate you've not been training for HYROX, but is there anything that maybe springs to mind that you think is worth sharing with people who are training for HYROX, like a certain thing to think about? I mean, maybe not. Maybe we've touched on it already. I don't know.
I'll give the broadest advice possible, which I've gotten from a few different people, coaches I've respected over the years, because I've been lucky enough to train with a bunch of different coaches just because I've moved around a bunch, and uh, I guess the way I would phrase it is that the details don't matter compared to just doing the work, and so like I've sometimes been in training groups where people are starting to get into arguments about, should we have 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes of rest between these mile reps? And people get worked up about it. And I've been in training groups that have essentially splintered over these sorts of disagreements about, should we be doing 8 by 6 minutes or 6 by 8 minutes and it's like, if there's one thing that I think I've come away with and that coaches have told me, it's like, man, don't sweat the details. Obviously the details matter to some degree. Like there's a difference between 2 by 10 seconds and 2 by 10 minutes, but within the broad realm of like reasonable training, just get it done. And what matters is putting in the effort and then make it recovering between workouts. What doesn't matter is like the precise intensity, the exact details of what you're doing. There's no like secret magic way of training. It's just like you stress your body, and you can do that in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah, yeah, love it. This has been brilliant. Thank you. Is there anything else I should have asked you that you want to share? And then also, can you sort of just tell us a little bit about your new book, where to get it, and where people should follow you if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for having me on. This has been fun, and it's been it's been an exploration for me too. Like, I actually just came up to the chair here from my basement where I've just installed a squat rack. So I'm at long last, after being the skinniest endurance runner in the world, I'm really trying to put my money where my mouth is and build some strength. So who knows? Maybe I'll be high roxing it at some point.
Awesome.
But yeah, so thank you for having me on. The new book is called The Explorer's Gene. The way I'm framing it, especially for endurance athletes, is endure was all about how we push our limits. Explore is about why we push them, or the Explorer's Gene is about why we push them. It comes out, I think, March 25th in North America. I think it's a week later in the UK. If you go to alexhutchinson.net, so Alex Hutchinson is my name.net is because some 11-year-old kid in New Jersey got the .com domain 20 years ago. But yeah, alexhutchinson.net, it's got links to where to order, including in the UK. And yeah, I hope people enjoy it. So
Awesome.
thanks.
Awesome. Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant book. Endure was awesome as well. And yeah, thank you for this. Hopefully see you at a HYROX event soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg.